To God be the glory.
Perhaps you are familiar with the phrase, cheaters never prosper. I heard that phrase a lot when I was growing up, as adults would encourage maybe integrity, or they'd discourage dishonesty and lying and cheating. But as I got older, it appeared to me as if cheaters did prosper. I saw classmates cheating on tests. They didn't get caught. I saw kids stealing candy from the local market. I witnessed adults lying to protect themselves. And from my young eyes, my perspective, they always seemed to get away with it. Even the local drug dealer was doing quite well. As I became a young adult, I knew people in the business world who were unethical, yet their business seemed to thrive and prosper. I watched people at work step on others, climbing their way to the next step of the corporate ladder. And even today, I see criminals stealing from the innocent and unaware through what we might call cyber crimes. People get emails where they get scammed out of their money, bank accounts, credit cards. They get hacked by people sitting in perhaps even another country. And none of these bad actors seem to get caught. So all of this begs the question, is it true that cheaters never prosper? Well, now that I've lived long enough to see how things play out, I've noticed those young drug dealers, they're not on the street anymore. In fact, there aren't many old criminals running around at all, because eventually it all catches up with them. And let's face it, you can only lie, cheat, and steal from people for so long before you start to forget exactly what lie you told or which person you extorted. Maybe the police catch you, or maybe you just cheated someone bigger and stronger than you. But either way, in God's world, you cannot walk the path of the wicked without consequence. This is a major theme in the book of Proverbs, that good and wise decisions will prosper you, while wicked decisions will destroy you. In fact, you can't read a single chapter in this book without this being plainly stated, that wisdom will preserve you, while foolishness will destroy you. And that brings us to our proverb for this lesson. Solomon writes, "Surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird. But they lie in wait for their own blood. They lurk secretly for their own lives. So are the ways of everyone who is greedy for gain. It takes away the life of its owner." Now, right before Solomon shares this wisdom, we learn that this advice is specifically for his son. Solomon wants his son to avoid keeping company with evil people who maybe hide in the shadows and move about secretly in order to take advantage of others. They're willing to harm. They're even willing to murder others for their own gain. But the reason Solomon says to stay away from these kinds of people is because at some point it will all catch up with them. One day their secret scheme will be found out, and it will be like someone spreading out a net to catch a bird where the bird is actually watching them set the trap. So Solomon said, "Surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird." And not only will they not catch their prey, they themselves will fall into the trap. It will cost them their life. When you get to Proverbs chapter 2, the first half of the chapter talks about God guarding, preserving, and delivering those who fear him and walk in his ways. But the second half of the chapter is about the wicked. And he describes them as people who rejoice in doing evil. people who delight in the perversity of the wicked, whose ways are crooked and who are devious in their paths. And then he speaks specifically about sexual immorality and those who are entangled with an immoral woman. He also refers to her as the seductress. Solomon says this, "For her house leads to death, and her paths to the dead." That chapter ends with these words, "But the wicked will be cut off from the earth, and the unfaithful uprooted from it." Solomon is going to come back to this seductress woman later, and we'll dig in further in a separate lesson, but I really want to press the point here that sin never pays what it promises. Cheaters never prosper. So let's say you have a man who's married. One day he's tempted to cheat on his wife with another woman. The Bible calls that adultery. It is the breaking of a covenant promise to remain faithful. Some would say it's cheating of the worst kind. But the man might think to himself something like this, "Well, it's just one time. I'm not going to get caught, so what harm can it do? My wife isn't giving me the attention I deserve at home, so I'm going to go get it myself." Or someone might even say, my wife and I, we have this understanding. We have an open relationship. She knows that I cheat, so it's okay. Or maybe you have a young single man or woman. They might think this, "Well, I'm not married. I haven't committed to anyone. I'm not breaking any vows, so I can do what I want." They might think, "It's best to experiment now before I settle down. What's the harm? I use protection. God made me with these desires, so I'm going to act on them. Nobody tells me what to do. I can indulge in whatever I want." But it's all a trap. Human beings aren't any smarter than a bird if they see the trap set and they don't respond wisely to the trap. Solomon says the home of the seductress leads down to death. And once you engage, there's no going back. Listen to what Solomon says as he gives an example of how this might all play out. He says, "Whoever commits adultery with a woman lacks understanding. He who does so destroys his own soul. Wounds and dishonor he will get, and his reproach will not be wiped away. For jealousy is a husband's fury, therefore he will not spare in the day of vengeance. He will accept no recompense, nor will he be appeased, though you give him many gifts." It is very important to think about the unintended consequences of sin. It's just a one-night stand, a man thinks. But does he stop and think about whether she's married, whether she has children, whether the husband will come looking for him someday in a dark alley, whether sexually transmitted diseases are present, whether his sin will be uncovered by those he does not want to know about this, or whether it will cost him an existing friendship, his job, or perhaps even a baby will come from this union, and that means child support. Let's talk about stealing now for a moment. Solomon writes, "Stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of hell." Here we see the same result. Ultimately, death and destruction are waiting for people who walk this kind of path. Remember, the proverb that we're focusing on here is that of the bird catcher who spreads out his trap, his net for the bird. But he does so right in front of the bird. So not only will he not catch the bird, ultimately, because we're really talking about wicked people who take advantage of others, he will end up falling into his own trap. So if we're talking about stealing, perhaps at some point the bank robber thinks he puts together some great plan to get away with his next heist. But because he's done this once too often, the police are onto him. They're waiting for him before he even arrives. Or maybe this thief breaks into the home of someone who's armed. The real-life scenarios are endless about thieves walking into a trap themselves. Listen to what Solomon says about dishonesty in general. He says, a worthless person, a wicked man, walks with a perverse mouth. He winks with his eyes. He shuffles his feet. He points with his fingers. Perversity is in his heart. He devises evil continually. He sows discord. Therefore his calamity shall come suddenly. Suddenly he shall be broken without remedy. You see, a dishonest person may appear to be a smooth talker, but perversity is in his heart. And while he may be able to fool other men, he cannot fool God. And it's just a matter of time before calamity comes his way. Several times in the book of Proverbs, Solomon mentions the use of dishonest scales. And he says they are an abomination to God. Dishonest scales is a reference to the weights used in the marketplace to measure out grain or anything being purchased by weight. So if we asked for a pound of wheat and the scales or the weights being used in that marketplace look like I'm getting a pound when I'm really getting less, that's cheating. And to God, this behavior will lead to destruction. It is a sad reality that we live in a world where many have rejected God's way of living. So instead of living a life guided by what is fair, just, and right, many people, they think that it's okay to take advantage of others. And these people might even teach their children that this is the most advantageous way to live and to get ahead in life. They truly believe that cheating in life is what smart people do to avoid falling behind those who are weak. Solomon tells us plainly that they are wrong. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. Let's conclude with a real-life example, an example you may already be very familiar with. In the book of Esther, there is a wicked man named Haman. Haman wants to destroy the Jewish people, and he is particularly irritated with one specific man whose name is Mordecai. Because Haman was a high-ranking official in the king's palace, the king of the Medes and the Persians, he expected certain honor and respect. But Mordecai refuses to bow before Haman. And so Haman begins to build gallows from which he plans to hang and execute Mordecai publicly. What Haman does not know is that Mordecai uncovered a plot to assassinate the king, and so the king loves Mordecai, while Haman can't stand him. By the time you get to the end of the story, a beautiful story, not only does the king honor Mordecai, but when Haman's plan to kill Mordecai and all of the Jews is uncovered, the king sees those gallows and orders that Haman be hung there. It's a perfect illustration of the wicked falling into their own trap. Surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird, but they lie in wait for their own blood. They lurk secretly for their own lives. So are the ways of anyone who is greedy for gain. It takes away the life of its owner. I want to encourage you to spend some time thinking about this proverb. It can appear at times like cheaters prosper, but the Bible says they do not. And if you look around, you'll see reality confirms the Bible is accurate. It can be tempting to cheat. It can be tempting to lie and steal, maybe to get ahead in life. But at some point, it will catch up with you. And knowing this gives us wisdom for living. See you next time.